think that's the point we try to make in the phantasmagorical rooms. Even non-phantasmagoricals get leaped in. A guy, Jasper Abbey, he's atheist,
right?
But he's very he just has the logic that we seem to abide by.
Well, it's just recognizing the subjective objective difference and applying concepts.
I suppose someone who's going to take that position has this bad taste of if you put it subjective, it's somehow, or intersubjective, it's somehow less good, less hearty,
less
it
real.
doesn't count as much.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's
maybe we could segue from morality into subjectivity and the mind and consciousness and how it relates to the brain.
Right.
I know you've posted a lot of videos about that, Nykytyne. And it seems that there are more than two possibilities, but the two that most stand out in my mind as to how consciousness relates to the brain or the nervous system or the body in general. It's either consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, which has downward causal influence on the rest of the body. So in other words, we're not totally determined. The brain isn't, or the other option is that the brain is just producing consciousness as an epiphenomenon. We're aware of what the body was already going to do, regardless of any conscious input.
Right.
So, which do you think that either one of these seems more true to you, or?
Well, I don't really like. I mean, I have some problems with epiphenomenalism in that I feel like if consciousness didn't serve some function other than a what could be done without consciousness, then it wouldn't have evolved in the first place.
Yeah.
Like a bacterium is capable of interacting with its environment, of monitoring its own chemical composition and making changes and things, but it's not conscious. It has no nervous system.
Right.
A nervous system, and especially an advanced nervous system, gives us, where we can become feeling, thinking, reasoning beings who have wants and desires, and that's, I think, confers some advantage that a non-thinking thing will never have.
Right. Yeah.
And so,
that's a good point.
I would call it an emergent
It seems
property.
you could come to some kind of reasonable conclusion, or not conclusion, but some endpoint, some viewpoint that complexifying, gaining consciousness is qualitatively deeper than this bacteria example.
Right.
In terms of feeling, you can feel lots of pain more so than let's say a bacteria ever could, at least seemingly, and more pleasure.
Yeah.
You could appreciate and depreciate reality that much more in that much more complex ways, and that's all I think that's going.
You have a larger breadth of experience.
So that paradoxically brings the good and the bad, if you want to call it that, this negative and positive, all the way up, just in a bigger pool, I suppose.
As your potential for pain increases, your potential for pleasure and enjoyment also seems to increase with it hand in hand, right?
Okay. Just want to make sure
So
you got that.
Nykytyne, do you think that there is any experience at all, or awareness at all present in a bacterium or a single cell, or
I don't think there's any reason to come to that conclusion at all.
No, so it's a product of a sufficient number of neurons that makes experience.
It's the interaction of neurons or something that worked like that.
So do you think that there's like a specific number of neurons that it takes before all of a sudden this experience turns on?
I mean, what we're asking right now is, how is it that neurons produce subjective experience? I mean, that's basically the question.
That is the question.
But I think probably more so than just the sheer number of neurons is having them interact in certain patterns that perhaps have yet to be disclosed.
Right.
That's right.
But because the way the brain is organized with these various, if you look at the way like the visual cortex, for example, is organized, where at first you have like a point-to-point mapping of the retina onto the back of the occipital lobe, and then it goes into all these association areas. And I think something about the way the brain itself communicates with itself is what produces the subjectivity that we experience.
Right.
Not necessarily just having enough neurons or enough connections, but it's the way they're connected also.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I think what's beneficial about thinking of consciousness as an emergent property of neural function is, when we're talking about visual experience, I think that there's something called the binding problem. Are you familiar with that? Where
Yeah.
we have a unified conscious experience,
Right.
Where the shape and the color of any particular object are bound together in our experience.
Right.
But they're represented neurally, not only in different places in the brain, but at different times.
At different times, right.
So,
and then on top of that, you have like other issues going on. Like you have the fusiform gyrus in the bottom of the temporal lobe, which deals with facial recognition.
Right.
So you have people who with prosopagnosia who can't recognize faces, which would seem to me to be an integral part of the visual experience. But apparently, that is also separable from the overall experience.
It's sort of a patchwork
it's
of
odd.
all these other functions working together.
Right.
Yeah, I like the patchwork. Since we're talking about consciousness, here's a quote from a guy I think you like. We all like, Albert Einstein. No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. Do you think there's a lot of truth behind that? Have you experienced? Is this how you view your problem-solving capabilities? You fundamentally rested on a different conceptual plane of consciousness to analyze and objectify.
You want to repeat that one more time?
We'll repeat it. No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. So I want. How do you feel?
No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it.
Yeah.
What exactly is he trying to say there?
I don't know. What do you think he's trying to say?
Well, I mean,
is he implying a transcendent kind of nature behind?
Yeah, it sounds like he's trying to imply that or by the time you've solved a problem, you've moved on to a different level of consciousness than you were when you asked the question or something.
Right.
And if so, that implies there are levels of consciousness in some kind of vague abstraction.
Maybe we could frame it in terms of his actual scientific contribution. The shift from Newtonian physics to Einsteinian physics, where space and time are no longer absolute. Space isn't this big container as Newton thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's this relativistic space-time manifold.
Yeah.
That seems to require a shift in consciousness.
I think
to understand the difference, right?
Yeah.
I mean.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that was a huge shift in thinking for the entire world with Einstein and relativity. I mean, and then quantum mechanics was the next one. But going from like this deterministic Newtonian view to a view where suddenly there was no such thing as absolute rest with Einstein, and with quantum mechanics, which Einstein rejected, there was suddenly the possibility of probability or non-determinism, which I think really changed the way scientists thought about the world.
Right. I think non-locality also, which
is
I mean, Einstein
really
Einstein wanted to preserve a lot of classical physics.
Einstein was a bit of a determinist himself.
Yeah.
Right.
So talking about the philosophy of not leaving behind or finding something right about everything, I mean, how much of you, Nicotine, would you say is a determinist? How much do you buy if you conceptually had to eat a chunk of the pie? I mean,
he said
the whole thing, it's partly, or I mean...
He prefers the emergent view of consciousness, so I guess you're not a total determinist, right?
Yeah, the book by Daniel Dennett called Freedom of Wills that I've been meaning to get to read, because I've heard a few of his lectures on free will and determinism, and basically the position he takes is that, while we may not have complete free will, as in like the future may in some sense be determined, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have any free will at all. That is, that the future is not inevitable. We have the ability to avoid certain outcomes.
Right.
And so he basically argues that we have the kinds of free will worth wanting to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Dennett is a weird character for me, only because I agree with so much of what he has to say, but at the same time I disagree with sort of where he begins. Which is, he begins. I don't know if you've read one of his other books, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, but he really latches onto this Darwinian algorithm, as he calls it. So he sort of reformulates Darwin's theory into this algorithmic, mechanistic process where any system which reproduces itself becomes, describable in terms of Darwinian selection. And so he thinks that everything can be understood in this way, not only biological evolution, but he talked about I forget the cosmologist's name, but this idea that actually every black hole is another universe creating itself, and that there's sort of a selection of universes in this way. So he applies Darwinianism as a universal acid to everything.